Susie,
Rob.
how much do you know about mammoths?
Big elephants that were hairy and lived in the Ice Age. Have I got it?
That's it. That's the end of the episode. Finished.
Okay.
Yeah, I guess we're going to have a look at today about why they might have gone extinct and also some failures related to mammoths. Trying to pick up upon our fossil fails. Well, what happens if you make a fail really big and we get mammoth in our failures? We're going to have a look at some examples. What are you expecting? How could you mess up looking at a mammoth, do you think?
Well, there's tiny mammoths, so you could have mistaken them for something.
Spoiler alert, ID.
There's giant mammoths, weren't they originally mistaken for like giant humans or something?
Oh, yes, the Cyclops. Yeah. Well, your stegosaur replaced that exhibit at the Natural History Museum. There was a big exhibit about that, which now you have removed and taken over with stegosaurs. You shouldn't feel worried about that. Yeah. So we're going to have a look at that, and maybe you've given us a bit of a spoiler alert there, but let's find out. So Susie, this week is my turn, and I'm going to leap in time from last time I spoke to you about something was the Ediacaran and the Cambrian, and now we're going to go right up to the other end of the scale and talk about what you've described in the past as topsoil, much more recently now.
You're so diverse, Rob. You can do everything. 500.
I could do it all. I should say I'm far more comfortable talking about the Cambrian than I am talking about mammoths, I was particularly intrigued by this story because it's a fun story this time. Because we're picking up slightly on our fossil fail story by talking about mammoth fails this time. Well, although, I've asked you not to read the papers in advance this time, so you'll be learning along as we go through this as I try to explain to you, and we'll find out whether they are or aren't fails, but you can decide for yourself.
Okay, that's a good thing. That's a useful function I can have in today's podcast. Yeah. Fail or not fail.
Before we start, what do you know about mammoth extinction? What do you think caused them to get gone?
Well, I'm going to say not much, but I think that they went extinct in different places at different times, didn't they? So wasn't there like a really late surviving population in that island off the north coast of Siberia or something?
There was.
And that maybe some were to do with climate change, but maybe some were hunted by...
Absolutely. That's the two main theories, is that there was two main hypotheses for the extinction of mammoths. And mammoths went extinct alongside a lot of other things. This is the megafaunal extinction. We talked about this briefly in our direwolf episode, which we're going to pick up on again at some point today. So the megafauna, the big things, the big mammals went extinct fairly recently, over the last, over a period of 100,000 years to 10,000 years, maybe more recently. They went extinct roughly coincident when humans arrived, but some people think it's climate, some people think it's human predation. You've got to remember that the big things went extinct and the little ones seem to be doing okay. So it's an unusual kind of climate dynamic and, extinction dynamic. But one of the main working hypotheses is that humans turn up in a particular continent like Australia or North America, and then shortly later, all the big things like mammoths go extinct. But you highlight...
Mammoths in Australia.
Sorry, I'm just talking about where the big mammals were. No, there were no mammoths in Australia. No, there would have only been marsupials in Australia as far as I'm aware, apart from bat. Yeah, but there were giant marsupials, so giant wombats and giant kangaroos and giant things. Australia was a crazy place. Well, still is, I guess, but I don't want to... It still is. I've never been, so I want to go find out how crazy it is for myself. But you mentioned the population hanging on. That's absolutely right. In Wrangel Island, just off the north of Siberia, is where we currently have the understanding that there was a tiny archaic population hanging on. May have even gotten a bit smaller because, of island dwarfism, but we're not going to go into that right now. So there were these populations clinging on in small islands, potentially because they're away from the humans. Do you know how long ago the ones on Wrangel... So Wrangel Island were the most recent mammoths. Do you know when they went extinct, if I was to ask you to guess?
Isn't it like outrageously recent, like at the same time the pyramids were being built or something like that? Like super recent, like 6,000 years ago or 10,000 years ago or something?
4,000 years ago is what the estimates are. So this is a mind-bending fact that I like to share about mammoths, is that they were living on this island 600 years after the Great Pyramids of Giza in Egypt were constructed.
That's insane that there were mammoths alive when the Egyptians were building the pyramids.
Absolutely. I mean, I don't know if that's testament to how recent the mammoths are or how actually phenomenally old the pyramids are. I think that's part of it. And for a more example closer to home, the Stonehenge would have been built and about 500 years old. Yeah.
Amazing. Stonehenge being built, there are mammoths mooching around in Siberia. Yeah. Crazy.
I mean, it is a bit sad when we think about what the Egyptians and the Greeks were up to in comparison to our ancestors. I took my Greek friend to visit Stonehenge. She was very much unimpressed. She was like, "What? Ancestors are weak. What are you doing?"
Unweld.
Yeah, she was not impressed. Okay, the other fun fact about mammoths that isn't really relevant, but I like to say it anyway. Woolly mammoths were more closely related to Indian elephants than Indian elephants are related to African elephants. That's a fun fact. So if you look at an Indian elephant and an African elephant, you think they're very closely related, but mammoths were part of that Asian family. Anyway, let's go on to the paper this week, because this is becoming characteristic of my episodes, is that a waffle at the beginning. Let's talk about the specific paper we're going to talk about. So this is adopted mammoths from Alaska turn out to be whale's tail. They've got a gag in the title. So this is the Journal of Quaternary Sciences by Matthew Wooler and Pat Drunken Miller. Oh, you know Pat, do you?
I don't know.
How do you know Pat?
He also is a dinosaur guy. He works up in Alaska.
Okay.
Worked on dinosaurs from the North Slope. Yeah.
Oh, he works on mammoth as well.
Reptiles. Yeah, marine reptiles. Very, very, works on all sorts of things.
So this was published in December 2025, so fairly recently, although not as recent as some of the other ones we've done. So this is an unusual paper for us because it's a fairly short, arcane paper on much more recent stuff, but I thought it was a really fun story. So this team, Wooler and Co., have set up a scheme called Adopt a Mammoth. Have you heard of Adopt a Mammoth?
I haven't. It sounds like something that Colossal Biosciences might be interested in, though.
Well, we're going to come back to Colossal Biosciences later on, but we have to be a bit careful about what we say about this because of, hey, we're not the mainstream media. We can say what we want.
Mainstream media.
We could be unguarded.
They're not listening.
So, Adopt a Mammoth is a fun scheme. It's like a citizen science scheme where people can get involved and provide their funding, and they can give their money to this team, and they will carbon date a mammoth fossil. So this is from Alaska. So in Alaska, they've got an absolutely enormous repository of fossils from all over Alaska, and they're trying to intentionally identify what the youngest mammoth is on the mainland. So they're interested in trying to get them, but they've got over 1,500 specimens at the museum. You can pay and you can win a prize if your one ends up being the youngest. So the way they're going to do that is with carbon dating, but other techniques as well if it proves to be interesting. So that's fun. So you can go and adopt a mammoth if you like.
So you adopt a mammoth by paying, and then that funding is used to radiocarbon date it to figure out how old they are. That's an excellent idea. I love it. Very, very, very ingenious way of funding research there.
So, but they're all doing all sorts of really fun stuff with mammoths. It's not just the dates of them. They've been doing some isotope geochemistry on them. And they talk about a story, I think they had it in Science or Nature a few years ago, I can't remember, from the same team, where they used isotope chemistry from the tusks, but of course they could reconstruct what that mammoth was eating at different points in its life cycle because the tusk was depositing down a particular chemistry that reflects where it was living at the time. And they can create this map of this mammoth like moving around Alaska over its 28 years that it was living on Earth, I think. That's super fun. But I'm not sure that's part of the adopt a mammoth age though. So let's get back to this situation then. Yeah, they found this one particular mammoth that lived for 28 years, a 28 years old mammoth, 17,000 years ago, and they could trace it moving around the place. So this particular paper, they start with this idea that when did they want to figure out when mammoths went extinct? Did they survive in refugia? Were humans responsible? Was climate responsible? Those are these are big questions about extinction dynamics, about humans' impact on the biosphere, about climate change. These are really big, important questions.
Well, and dating is presumably really, really critical to that because being able to correlate major climatic events to specific extinction events, you could actually do that with things that are only done a few thousand years ago.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is made more complicated because the working hypothesis was that there was this population of, on the islands of 4,000 years ago, but on the mainland of North America, they're thought to have gone extinct about 13,000 years ago. So there's a big difference there. But some recent studies using environmental DNA from fossils have suggested that there might have been refugia on the mainland about 6,000 years ago. So this environmental DNA is an interesting new approach. But we talked about ancient DNA, extracting DNA from the fossils themselves. But environmental DNA is like more dirty and simple than that, in that you just dig it up, have a look at all the DNA in the environment, and you can find bits and pieces surviving, attached to clays and stuff, and construct a whole ecosystem rather than a particular individual animal, which is kind of shocking. But I say dirty because, of course, it's full of contaminants and all sorts of stuff. But this implies that mammoths might have been surviving a bit longer. But was it contamination? Was it leaking out of mammoth fossils? Who knows? So that's the point. So this is where they introduced the adopter mammoth, and this is their attempt to focus on some samples. So they started quite reasonably with some samples that were...
Oh my God, everybody, Rob's brain has just stopped.
Okay, so in this paper, quite reasonably, they started with ones that they think are quite suspiciously young, right? Or, the earliest ones. Of course, with this project, that's how it's going to work. You're going to turn up looking for the ones that you think are the youngest. So they started with these two specimens collected in 1951 near Fairbanks. So how much do you know about Alaska? Fairbanks is right in the middle.
Right. Okay. Yeah.
I've
got.
Yeah. I'm not entirely sure why Fairbanks is there, because that sounds rude, but I mean, why live in the middle of Alaska? Maybe if you're, some sort of Inuit people living off the land, but why build a city? Anyway, never mind. The city of Fairbanks is there, and then near there's this place called Dome Creek, and these specimens were collected by Otto Geist in between 1951 and 1952, and they seem quite young. So they've got two epiphyses.
When you say they seem quite young, how do they...
Well, this is based on contextual information, I guess, about what the site's like. I actually don't know how... They haven't got any proper ages for it. It's more like this seems like it might be young. So they've got two fossils, they're two epiphyseal plates. Can you describe to us figure number 2?
So, I mean, they could be... Apparently they're bone, so they're chunks of bone. One is sort of almost a circle with a broken bit on the top. It looks like it's got kind of growth rings or something. And the other is looks like it might be a chunk of a similar circle. Underwhelming? I'm going underwhelming.
That's exactly what I was... This is why I asked you to have a look at the photos, because they are indeed underwhelming. That was the point, right? These are just two fairly flat, disc-looking fossils with very little morphology for you to get a handle on what they are. They're two chunks of bone. That's about all we could say. Maybe, yeah. I don't know how big they are. I'm assuming that scale... It's America, right? So it could be metric or imperial scales, couldn't it? I mean, you wouldn't put an inch scale bar on something, would you? That'd be...
I'm sure it's a 10 centimeter scale.
Yeah, 15 centimeters across, roughly, yeah. Large flat discs. Okay, so they then submitted it to carbon dating. So carbon dating is something that people have a lot of misconceptions about. People, when you think about fossils, often say that people have heard of carbon dating a lot. I don't know why it's the most famous method, but of course, as you know, it doesn't last that long, right? You can only do it for much more recent things. It's quite good and quite accurate, but if you want to work at the fossils that you and I work on, we're going to have to work on lots of different other stable isotopes. Do you do much dating work?
I do actually do quite a lot of dating work.
Oh, for your work in the Morrison, you must have had to have done,
yeah. And my postdoc is currently working on really new ways to date fossil bones and exciting stuff. But yeah, we have to use radiometric isotopes. So we're looking at things like uranium, lead and potassium argon, and we have to date the rocks at the moment, right? We can't date the bones directly. We have to date ash in the rocks around. Whereas with carbon dating, you're actually dating the radioactive carbon-14 in the bones itself. That is accumulated into the bones by what the animals eat during their lifetime. I think it's the limit is about 30,000 years for carbon dating. Is that right? Which is kind of going to be, I guess, yeah. I mean, it will work for these mammoths if they think they died out 16,000 years ago, won't it?
Yeah, absolutely. So they did the carbon dating and they found them to be about 2,000 years old. Now, that's quite shocking because that is much younger. But these specimens were found alongside bison and horse. So if they're 2,000 years old, that makes them younger than even the most youngest mammoth. Suspicious. So they then subjected to an extra battery of tests using stable isotopes and looking at the mitochondrial DNA. They didn't get a good lot of DNA out of it, but they were able to extract the mitochondrial DNA, which was enough to identify the specimens. Now, can you tell from the title of this paper where this might be going? What do they end up as?
Are they whales?
Whales, yes. One of them was a specific right whale. The other one was the common minke whale. Now, this raises a question. Have you seen where this is going? These specimens are 400 kilometers inland at Fairbanks in the middle of Alaska. So whales is not the thing that people would have expected to do. So, I mean, this doesn't sound crazy. I mean, you would expect to know the difference between a whale and a mammoth if you looked at them. But this is why I asked you to look at the photos, right? They are underwhelming. There's not enough morphology there. The authors say that themselves, right? So,
yeah.
through a combination of they expected these to be mammoths from thousands of years ago. They've used the DNA and the stable isotopes to demonstrate they're actually whales from much more recently. So what's going on here? Let's work through. So they do this. Well, why I quite like this paper is because it's kind of fun. It's a fun science communication project. It's a serious issue. And then they just sequentially work through some hypotheses about how whales have ended up there. So hypothesis number 1, did they swim there? It was a weird place to start, I thought, because Fairbanks is like 400 kilometers inland. Now,
It's a big river, though, isn't there? They've got
River. Yes, they're
the river. I guess that's where they're going with that.
well. That's what they say. But this is known as an inland incursion. Quote. So the whales do this apparently. You know, like there was like a big media hubbub when a whale went into the Thames estuary and.
Yeah. But Rob, the Thames estuary is about 15 miles from the.
Exactly. No. Even if it made all its way up to like, I don't know, Gloucester or whatever, that would still. It still wouldn't be as far as the distance involved. And if there was a whale in Gloucester, I would be entirely surprised. That's not where the Thames ends up, is it? Anyway, the point is, on this island, by the side you get 400 kilometers across, you're out the other side the other time. So going up through the canals of the Midland Canal or whatever, that would be a safari. Anyway, one of them whales was, so that's theoretically possible, but these specimens are still 25 kilometers from a river. So somehow they swim up the river, die, and then get that far. But also the northern white, sorry?
Crawled out onto land.
Crawled out, yeah. This walking whale. Maybe we'll do an episode of walking whales later on. Also, the northern right whale is too big. A minke whale, they say, is possible, but a northern right whale ain't going to happen. So then the second hypothesis they talked about was scavenging and bears. I mean, they only spend like 2 sentences thinking about this because that's kind of like, oh, that's possible, but is a bear going to drag a whale that far? Unlikely. So that's the end of that hypothesis. Which hypothesis? I mean, I should ask you what your hypotheses are so far before we go too far.
Well, they're only 2,000 years old. I would say the obvious one is that people 2,000 years ago were whaling in Alaska.
Yeah, well, that was the next one. The next hypothesis they deal with is humans, yeah. Now, the use of these epiphyseal plates by humans is documented. People apparently were using them for bowls and cutting boards and the like. Again, and that kind of makes sense. It's a nice flat bone. It actually would make a good piece of useful thing. I mean, I was thinking, why weren't they using wood? But, you know, it's Alaska.
It's Alaska, no trees, mate.
Yeah, there are forests in Alaska, but if you've got whales, you're going to use the whale bits, right? And, you know, if you've got a bone, it's going to survive the freezing temperatures easier, isn't it? So people were using that. So that is possible. But of course, you might be able to pick that up with some sort of archaeological cues. But then they come to they work through all these hypotheses and then end up with another one, which slightly makes all the rest of this a bit pointless. Is that the guy that was collecting these was working all over Alaska.
Oh, he was just wrong about where he collected them from.
At the same day that he was accessioning, so you work at a museum. Tell us about what is the process of accessioning?
Well, you get some fossils. I mean, I guess it depends how you acquire them, but you know, somebody might donate you some fossils. So let's say you have a dealer who comes in and says, I want to give you these fossils to go in your collection. And, you know, I mean, we have a very strict due diligence process, of course, but ultimately you do just have to take the guy's word for where it's from, right? So that they say, oh yeah, well, I picked this up in place X, then that's what goes in the register, you know, that's what goes in the register. So I could see how this could happen.
I should explain to the listener why I laughed there is because when Susie said the words due diligence, her eyes popped out of her head as if to emphasize due diligence is important here. This is why I thought I should emphasize this bit of the story, because I knew you working at a museum, you might be interested in this. Yes, this collector, he was collecting these things all over Alaska. But at the same day that he was accessioning the specimens from Doan Creek, he was also accessioning some specimens from the coast. So it's quite possible that it's a simple administrative error, that he was busy at Dexter Point specimens and his other specimens from Doan Creek, all starting with a nice capital D. They got a bit mixed up in the thing. And also, I should have pointed out, they actually, when they did the isotope chemistry and the carbon dating, they found cues that it was from a marine environment. So that also is telling you that, you know, these things, well, and again, that makes sense, right? They're a whale. They're not going to be terrestrial whales, are they? So I think on balance, which of these hypotheses are you going to lean into?
Well, I think it's most likely to be the administrative error. And I think ultimately, you know, Rob, this is a message to us all to take excellent field notes and label our sample bags.
I knew you were going to go. As soon as I saw that, I thought Susie's going to have opinions on this. There you go. Make sure you do some good field work and some due diligence Foggy eye due diligence. When you're accessioning your specimens, make sure that your specimen numbers and your field numbers and your all match and that there's a good paperwork. Because if you get it wrong, well, quite frankly, you're fucked. You can end up making a massive mistake.
And you know, the thing is, like, I was a year or so ago, I was going back through some samples that were collected historically, well, in the 1940s and 1950s. And they're rock samples that I'm analysing now. And I want to use these samples. And of course, I can only trace them through their field numbers by going back to the person who collected them's field notebook. And it makes me read it, trying to do this process of matching, you know, field numbers and field notebooks to actual specimens makes me make better field notes, because it's so difficult if you make that note.
Absolutely. And of course, having done field work, and I don't do as much field work as you, but when you're there, you know, it doesn't feel like that urgent.
It's not the fun bit, is it?
No. You just want to get them in a bag and go, well, I'll remember. You think to yourself, you won't remember. No. Which hillside did this come from? What day did you collect it? Come on, just I'm extolling myself to do better due diligence again. Is that the word of the day, or the phrase of the day? Okay, so let me finish with a summary from this paper then. This is quoting from their conclusions. Ultimately, this may never be fully resolved. However, in terms of the Adopt a Mammoth project, this effort has successfully ruled these specimens out as contenders for the last mammoths. The project has already doubled the number of radiocarbon dates associated with mammoths from Alaska relative to those generated over the last 50 years. An unintended byproduct of efforts such as this, which is explicitly generating a large dataset by casting an unusually wide sample net, is the discovery of unexpected findings. Continued efforts like the Adopt a Mammoth project, adding large numbers of vetted dates and specimens to the mammoths of other fauna, will help fine-tune records and make collections more valuable for further research, whilst also revealing important new insights into the past. I like that. That was a nice little conclusion. I mean, I guess they are patting themselves on the back a bit, like saying, aren't we clever for coming up with this Adopt a Mammoth project? But this is an example about,
I'd say, well done, Matthew Wooler.
Yes, well done them. Sure. So that was just an interesting use of how citizen science can work. So citizen science is when you recruit the general populace to do some work in some science projects. There's all sorts of interesting examples out there. Not many from the paleontology, although there's been some fun ones down on the Jurassic coast. So before we move on, though, just to think about this paper, this is Matthew Wooler and your friend Pat, but there's some other colleagues on here.
I've just spotted this.
Yes, here we go. Also on the author line is Ben Lamb and Beth Shapiro, listed as Colossal Biosciences, our old friends. So, Colossal Biosciences are this biotechnology company that have claimed to have brought animals back from de-extinction and are currently working on it, including the woolly mammoth. Now, spoiler alert, they are not doing that. And if you want to check out why, you can go and listen to our episode on direwolves. In fact, I'll just do that anyway. It was a really fun episode. Now, but here they are doing some proper science as well. So I don't know where does this leave us? I don't know. I guess.
Well, I guess what they probably helped with the ancient DNA in this debate. So they would have helped with DNA extraction. I mean, I think, when I've had discussions with people about that, why might you as a geneticist go and work for someone like Colossal? It is, I guess, the headlines are the sort of flashy stuff, kind of, it masks a lot of what is actually going on, which is people just doing quite niche genetics on ancient stuff that's hard to fund. And, I guess that's the kind of flip side to the Colossal Biosciences story, is that if they're then able to actually contribute interesting data and interesting methods for free they're funding, the flashy headlines help fund basic research, then, I can almost forgive them a little bit more. And maybe that's, this is the sort of thing that actually is their bread and butter, and that the geneticists who work for them are doing every day. So people like, presumably Ben Lamb, whoever he is.
Yes, this is an example of the things that you can do with that technology, not the things that you're faking and making it up. So in one of our episodes, it wasn't that direwolf one, we talked about how there's been this shady PR campaign of hit pieces against academics who criticize Colossal Biosciences. I thought that after that had been revealed, that would stop. But no, it hasn't. There are still continuing really poorly worded, ad hominem attacks that aren't based on anything going around trying to attack academics that criticize that. So if you and I suddenly fall off a cliff, or some piece of paper gets written about how we are unqualified to talk about de-extinction. Well, they'd be right. They would be wrong. Yeah, but Tory heritage isn't right. There are lots of other people that are desperately qualified. I mean, in our case, they're right there. But anyway, so with that in mind, that was the end of that paper. I thought that was interesting. Thanks for yeah, thanks for bringing that to my attention. But there was one other fossil fail I wanted to talk about with you before we moved on, which is a paper I've just sent you. So let's have a little. Okay, can you have a look at that one now?
Have a small pause while I
Yeah.
see if I can download the paper. Oh, looks like it clicked to download. Oh, it's downloaded this time because I'm on proper Wi-Fi. Okay.
Okay, so the two hypotheses that we've dealt with for mammoth extinctions are climate change and human interventions. Now let's look at a third one. So this paper is sense of smell reduction as a factor for mammoths and other mammoth extinctions, immunoglobulins as possible markers by Gleb, Zilberstein and other colleagues from Israel, Italy and Russia. Can you read the pink bits in the abstract that I've highlighted for you?
I can. Let me just zoom in a bit. It's a bit far away. I haven't got my glasses on. The development of allergies from plant pollen, changes in pollen's allergic toxicity. Where is this published? Hang on. Pollen's release period increasing or the emergence of a large quantity of flowering plants during climate change could lead to decrements in sensitivity to odours in animals during the breeding season. This may explain the extinction of animals due to a decrease in sexual intercourse.
Right, so what are your immediate thoughts?
Well, as I said, who published this? Who published?
This is in Earth History and Biodiversity, not a journal I've heard of.
Not a journal I've heard of. Oh, it's their first volume, maybe also their last volume. Earth History and Biodiversity 1.
I haven't made this there.
I just need to process this a little bit. So what they're saying is,
yeah.
So maybe there were some sort of changes to pollen, or possibly a development of allergies, or maybe more flowering plants due to climate change, which caused more pollen, and this led to a decrease in the ability of animals to smell stuff, and thus less sex.
Correct.
Now, there's hypotheses that are testable. And then there are hypotheses that are not testable. I'm interested to see which one this falls into. My initial feelings are going to be this.
But prepare yourself, brace, because there may not be a lot of testing of this hypothesis going on here. This may be a hypothesis plucked out of someone's nasal passages that are all blocked up with histones or histamines. All right, okay, so
what are the authors doing when they're having sex? Are they just going around sniffing?
I don't know. I mean, this is right. So the paper starts with the explanation about the climate change and the mammoth extinction, and they put forward this other hypothesis based on the development of allergies from plant pollen, changes in pollen's allergic toxicity, pollen releases period increasing, or the emergence of a larger quantity of flowering plants during climate change. So the idea is that the climate change is happening. I mean, we talked about climate change before, right? But I guess what they're saying is they're trying to identify a mechanism that as the climate changed and the tundra melted, there would have been a change in the pollen, and that could have led to an adverse immune disruption to these mammoths. Now, this strikes me as immediately preposterous because we can start poking holes in this straight away. Right? Allergies doesn't mean people go extinct. Right? Do you suffer from allergies?
I mean, you know what? Sometimes I get really itchy eyes, and it makes me quite miserable in the summer. But I'm definitely not going extinct as a result.
Okay. You've nevertheless managed to procreate despite that.
The entire population going extinct,
yeah,
because they've got itchy eyes.
And why would the mammoths? And here's the whole thing that I find really annoying about this. Why would mammoths selectively go extinct to this? This would be any mammal that has this immunoglobulin would go extinct, right? It's not all mammals that go extinct. It's just the big ones.
But also, Rob, surely a mammoth lived across the whole of, the northern hemisphere, right? Like, there's going to be suddenly every mammoth living in every population across the entire globe is suddenly going to develop an allergic reaction to pollen, which is so widespread that it's across the whole globe. And this climate change is affecting the whole globe, the whole of the northern hemisphere at the same time. So the mammoths in Alaska and the mammoths in like northern Siberia are both going extinct at the same time because it's just where do you find these papers? How did you ever find it?
I can't remember. I think one of my students brought it to me. I think that's what happened. I think it might have been Will, if it was Will. I can't remember. But this is bonkers. So, I mean, it doesn't take more than 3 seconds to demolish this theory of why this would take place. But nevertheless, they persist. So what they've done is that they actually, really what's happened here, there's very little in this paper at all, unsurprisingly. What they're doing is referring to 2 papers that some of these authors were involved in from 2021, 2022, where a team of Italians used some new technology to extract peptide sequences from the gut of a mammoth. And in that paper, that's an actual proper paper as far as I can tell, they sort of went through all the peptide sequences, explained how they did it, uploaded all the peptide sequences to a database. They talked about the contamination. They talked about how they identified them. As far as I can tell, those are bona fide papers. This paper seems to be, well, in our previous paper, we found these 2 sequences and we think they're immunoglobulins. That's it. That's the entirety of the paper. I mean, look at the results section. The methods section is, we did this in 2021 in this other paper. And the results section is 2 paragraphs saying we got these sequences. That's it.
Oh, wow, it really is. Oh, the credit authorship statement's longer than the results.
Yes, it is. And can you tell us about the pictures? Have you seen the pictures in this paper?
Yeah, that's what I made a face there because I scrolled and I've got some cracking images in here. This is like how to do figures for scientific publications 101 in here. The figure 2 is proteins sampling from mammoth trunk, and it appears to be a specimen of something, but I couldn't tell you what. A sort of lump.
No scale bar, no nothing.
Taken through the glass, clearly in a medium.
Yeah, because we've got the reflections of the people at the exhibit in front of.
Look, he's on the lower picture, figure 3. It's protein sample. Oh, it's the same. It's actually the same caption for figure 3, and it's unclear what it is. It's a kind of large curved horseshoe shaped folded thing. Don't know what it is with a plastic bag in the middle. Again, taken through the glass. I would say you can see the museum label.
It's a Russian museum.
Russian, and in the background, reflected in the glass, you can see the author. He's wearing, or somebody anyway, taking the photo. He's wearing a blue shirt, open at the neck, casual. Obviously taking it on a phone, I would suggest, because he's only got one hand up.
We don't need a scale bar. We don't need a scale bar because we've got the author's shirt. I mean, we don't know how tall the author is, so that might.
We don't know how tall, but there is some sort of mounted skeleton behind him, and obviously part of an exhibition that's reflected in the glass. They're quite the images. And actually, figure 3. Oh no, that's figure 1. Sampling from Chandrin mammoth's gut. I think that one might be a woman who's taking that photo. Is it the same? I think it's.
I can't tell. That one, that specimen there, the gut, that was actually the one that was sampled in the previous paper from 2021, 2022, where they, did some fluorescence on it and had some proper analysis. This paper seems to be, this paper does not include all the same set of authors. It includes a subset of those authors. So I have a suspicion there was a team worked on this together, and then some of them went, oh, look at these immunoglobulins, and some other members of the team went, are you all right? You go, you do that on your own. We don't need to be involved in that one.
I'm just reading the results. It says, in addition, a peptide, i.e., and then there is a word. Now, it might not be a word, but it looks like Swiftster and...
Oh, right, yes. That's the sequence. That's the amino acid sequence. So what they're saying is we have identified this amino acid sequence with this. So each one of those letters represents an amino acid.
Okay, and so what immunoglobulins?
Yes, so that is the mechanism. That's the mechanism which sets off allergies. Like when you get pollen, your immunoglobulin E will identify that, and then the immunoglobulin E encourages all the histamines to be released, which leads to the inflammation. So that's the mechanism. Although when I try and find out why or how they've identified this sequence as belonging to immunoglobulins, there's very little information, right? Because the result is 2 pages. There's no explanation about 2 paragraphs, apologies. And there's no explanation about what or how, which immunoglobulin that's related to, or how they identified it. We need a proper explanation of this. Although it doesn't really matter. If we found some immunoglobulin E in it, then what?
Well, maybe
you don't know how much you've got there.
Maybe it just meant this mammoth was allergic to something. It didn't mean that this suddenly explains the extinction of all of the mammoths, does it? It's quite the leap.
Indeed, even if you found this particular immunoglobulin there, which they haven't identified as one immunoglobulin or other, or part of the MHC complex, it doesn't mean anything, right? It doesn't mean, you'd have to know about the quantities, you'd have to compare it with some other baseline, you'd have to know about it was a contaminant. This is bonkers. But it did end up achieving some press. So, because of course, there was, did sneezing make mammoths go extinct? The Telegraph ran with it, of course, the Telegraph. So. But not many other people did, as far as I can tell. Final comment. Have you seen their data availability statement?
I saw that you had highlighted it for me specifically. The data that has been used is confidential.
Thank you. That's it. That's the end of this paper. That's all there is to say. So I thought that was a bit of extra fun. A little extra fun, spicy story for you there. Now, I think those two papers aren't really related, right? One is a serious science communication project, although it does involve some, of course, of biosciences people where they've done some carbon dating and found out that some mammoths were whales. Now, ultimately, that doesn't change the world, right? It doesn't really, the take-home message isn't really going to be like, well, we need to revisit our whole hypotheses. It's more just interesting. It's like, okay, we've done a citizen science project, but now we're beginning to tweak things. And the things that we thought were the last mammoths, actually, they weren't. So that's fun. It just indicates that we need to do a lot of funding. So that's a fun story, but it doesn't change the world. This other one is just, well, we'll let the listeners draw their own conclusions, shall we?
Yeah, lol.
What's your conclusion?
I think my conclusion is I'm actually quite curious to see whether Earth History and Biodiversity, the journal, got past volume 1, whether there was ever a volume 2. Who edits it? Who peer reviewed it? Yeah, I won't put it on my list of journals to submit to.
Good. Right, thank you. So, well, thanks, Susie. We'll tune in next time where you're going to tell me about something else, probably some Mesozoic reptiles, and we haven't figured out what yet.
No, I don't know what we're doing next time, but we will figure it out.
All right, thanks, Susie. See you soon.
See you, Rob. Bye.
The Fossil Files was created by Robert Sansom and Susanna Maidman.
The Fossil Files is a labour of love created in our spare time with no budget, so we really welcome any support you can provide us via our Patreon.
There, you can access bonus content and join in the discussion by posting your own questions or even participate in live episodes. You can find links to our Blue Sky, Instagram and YouTube channels on our website, fossils.libsyn.com.
Tune in next time to find out what they dig up.
The Fossil Files was created by Robert Sansom and Susanna Maidman.
The Fossil Files is a labour of love created in our spare time with no budget, so we really welcome any support you can provide us via our Patreon.
There, you can access bonus content and join in the discussion by posting your own questions or even participate in live episodes.
In either case, we want to hear what you think. You can let us know what you thought about topics we discussed or make suggestions for future papers on our social media channels.
You can find links to our Blue Sky, Instagram and YouTube channels on our website, fossils.libsyn.com.
Tune in next time to find out what they dig up.